Hello, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Michal Frankel, and I'm one of the volunteers with the Jewish Sustainability Initiative, and I'm also an ecologist working with Greening Australia. I'll be moderating the webinar this evening, but before I tell you about our fabulous panelists, I'd like to ask Jenny Van Proctor to lead the acknowledgement of country.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work and live, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, community, and culture. We welcome any Aboriginal attendees with us tonight and pay our respects to your elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that the lands were never ceded. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to write in the chat which lands you're on, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I'd like to start by just saying a few words about our group, the Jewish Sustainability Initiative, which we playfully call JewSI, draws on Jewish tradition to promote the sustainable use of the Earth's resources. We're a volunteer-led group. We work with councils, organizations, businesses, and individuals in order to mobilize the Sydney Jewish community to be part of the movement toward net zero emissions. And I'd like to just ask all of the volunteers with the Jewish Sustainability Initiative, if you want to just raise your hands, use the raise hand icon, just so others can see our fabulous group of volunteers. And a lot of our work is focused on helping people and businesses and organizations to reduce their energy consumption. But we're really excited about this evening's presentation because it focuses on another extremely important way that our community can help move the dial on carbon emissions, and that's through investing in climate solutions. So before I invite our panelists to talk to you about all this, I'd like to just introduce them, tell you a little bit about them, to speak about the connections between Jewish traditions and values and ethical investing. We're very honored to have with us Rabbi Dr. Benjamin Elton. Rabbi Elton has been chief minister of the Great Synagogue since 2015. He was born in Manchester, England, and earned an MA in history at Queen's College, Cambridge, and a PhD in Jewish history at Birkbeck University of London. For 7 years, he worked in the Ministry of Justice in London and then studied at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah in New York, where he received rabbinic ordination in 2015. He published a book in 2014, Britain's Chief Rabbis and the Religious Character of Anglo Jewry, 1880 to 1970, and is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society of London. He's also an honorary associate at the University of Sydney, an Orthodox rabbinic consultant to both the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies and the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. So we're really thrilled to have you with us. Our next panelist is Blair Palese. And in addition to all the fabulous things I'm about to tell you about her, she is also my dear friend and one of the first environmental leaders that I was connected with when I first moved to Australia. And she's also a fellow American, so we became fast friends. And more than anything, she is a force of nature, as you will soon see. Blair is managing editor and global climate editor at the international outlet Climate and Capital Media. She founded 350.org in Australia and was their CEO for 10 years. And that's a leading international organization focused on a just transition to renewable energy. Blair has worked for and consulted to organizations including the C40 Cities for Climate Action, the Australian Museum, the Green Building Council of Australia, the New South Wales Sustainable Energy Development Council of Australia, Sustainable Energy Development Authority, and the Climate Institute. Previously, she was head of PR for The Body Shop globally and head of communications for Greenpeace International, both in the UK. And she's held a number of not-for-profit board positions and a founding committee member of the Human Rights Watch in Australia. So thank you, Blair, so much for joining us. Trevor Thomas. Trevor is the managing director of Ethinvest, having joined in 1997 after spending 6 years in South America working in economic development. Previously, he was an economist with one of Australia's major banks and AP Dow Jones Telluride. He's been a certified financial planner since 2003. Trevor is a trustee of a number of philanthropic organizations, including the John T. Reed Charitable Trust and the Community Impact Foundation, and assists a number of charitable trusts and not-for-profit organizations with their investment strategies. And I know Blair is going to say a little bit more about when she introduces them as well. Justin Metcalf is an associate advisor at Ethinvest. And after founding an ethical investment advisory firm in 2008, he joined forces with Trevor Thomas and others to establish the Ethical Advisors Co-op before launching Australia's first responsible investment dedicated investment platform, the Emerald Wrap. Having been on the board of the peak responsible investment industry body for almost the last decade, Justin helped shape the mainstreaming of responsible investment through the globally recognized certification program. He's the former head of innovation wealth at Bendigo Bank and played a critical role in the reshape of Australia's largest financial planning network, AMP Financial Planning. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of the format, each of the presenters will be speaking for about 10 minutes. And then after all the speakers are through, we'll open it up for Q&A. Please make sure you keep yourselves on mute until we get to the Q&A. And then you can use the little hand icon to indicate that you'd like to ask a question. And so with that, I am going to pass it on to Rabbi Elton. And I'm going to just stop this share for a moment.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Jewish Sustainability Initiative for their invitation to speak, and Michelle and Jenny and everyone involved in the initiative, and say that I acknowledge that I'm speaking from Gadigal land this evening in Darlinghurst. I want to thank everyone for joining this important discussion. What I want to do for my allotted time is to share some sources, both halachic, that is to say, Jewish legal sources, and also agadic, more in the realm of philosophy, theology, ideas, the ideas of the Jewish tradition, what the tradition has to say about the interplay between business and ethics, essentially, investing in a way that reflects Jewish values. Is there such a concept of investing in a way that reflects Jewish values? Or do we just say that business is business and we keep it quite separate from our private Jewish ritual or even ethical life? And you won't be surprised to hear that I come to a resounding no on that question, but I want to explore some of the sources this evening a little so we can understand some of the nuances and some of the voices in the tradition. Now, one question that I always get asked quite a lot is what happens when we die, or at least what the Jewish tradition tells us happens when we die. And I always tell them that, in fact, we know very little about the Jewish afterlife, heaven, the world to come. Things are very vague and sketchy, but as it happens, there is a rather precise description of what goes on when you first go up to heaven. When you first die and your soul enters the heavenly court, you're asked a certain number of questions. And the very first question you're asked when you go up to heaven is, were you honest in business? So you're not asked, did you keep Shabbat? Did you keep Kashrut? Did you learn Torah? Those are all important things. And I'm sure the heavenly court has an interest in those things. But the very first question you're asked is, were you honest in business? Which I think is a very clear indication that Judaism has a place for business. They expect people to do business. They expect people to live off their own efforts, not to rely on a charity or donations, but wherever possible, to be earning a living by being a productive member of society. And in addition, that the tradition wants us to do our business in an honest and an upright way, one we can be proud of and we can talk about openly and honestly when we get to heaven. So our values and our ethics fully infuse our business dealings. Business itself is a Jewish value because it enables us to live without being a burden on other people. and the way we do business is has to be done in consonant with Jewish values of honesty and others, as we will see. I want to give another more halachic example. I suppose that's an agadic description of what happens when we go to heaven. How about a bit of black letter law halacha, which is clearly codified in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Certain people, because of their behavior, aren't able to serve as witnesses. So being a witness in a Jewish court is limited to certain categories of people, and you can actually disqualify yourself by certain items of behavior. Now, some are more obvious and intuitive, but others are less intuitive. So there are 4 categories of people who otherwise would be eligible to serve as a witness, but are excluded because of their behavior. The first is a thief. Okay, fine, fair enough. The second is somebody who gambles with dice. They're a gambler, and they seem to earn all or part of their income from dice playing. The third is somebody who lends at interest, known as ribbit. Ribbit is not permitted in Judaism, and therefore somebody who lends at interest is not allowed to be a witness. And the fourth is somebody who deals in sabbatical produce. So actually, we're in a Shemitah year now. Every 7 years, the land lies fallow, and you can't till it or harvest it industrially. You just have to take what you need and let everyone else take what they need. So these are 4 categories of people. Now, the first thing that strikes me about these 4 categories is they all concern business, all concern money or income or the acquisition of property. They can acquire property by stealing it, by winning it through gambling, by achieving it through interest payments on their loans, or by dealing, buying and selling produce of the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, which they shouldn't be doing. Again, it doesn't say if you don't keep Shabbat, if you don't keep Kashrut. They're people that they're also problematic categories. But why does this Mishnah say these 4 categories, which are all to do with business? I think, again, to really emphasize that our business dealings are in many ways the way we're judged, and we have to have a great deal of focus on our business dealings in regard to how they interplay with our values. But the first, third, and fourth, the thief, the interest loaner, and the dealer in sabbatical produce, these are clearly activities outside the law. These are not permitted. But gambling, in and of itself, is not forbidden. It's not against halakha to gamble. In fact, you do find that Jewish organizations, very religious ones, hold raffles and so on, hold lotteries. It's part of the way things are done. But somebody who makes their living from gambling is not allowed to be a witness, because the whole enterprise of gambling, as we know from the case of pokies in Australia, it places people at a disadvantage. People become addicted, people become dependent. This is not a way of earning one's living which is in consonant with Jewish values. Halakha is one thing, but it's against Jewish values to be somebody who makes their living for all sorts of reasons out of gambling, out of taking people's money away from them. The rabbis say that no one would ever gamble if they thought they would lose, and therefore all gambling is really taking advantage of people because they never expect to lose their money. Another concept I think is very important, also a halakhic concept, which goes to the question of values and investments or business, and that's the question of issa b'hana'ah. So something can be forbidden to eat, like shellfish, but it can also be forbidden not just to eat it, but even to have any benefit from it. For example, interesting enough, you can sell pork, you can sell shellfish, but you can't sell a mixture of milk and meat. You can't even have any benefit, even financial benefit, from meat and milk. You can't benefit from a stolen lulav. If you nick somebody's lulav, you can't use it. You can't have any benefit from something which is associated, been used for idolatry. So take this question of meat and milk. You can't open a cheeseburger stand and make your living from a cheeseburger stand. You can't even make a cheeseburger stand in an area where there are only non-Jews. So you're only selling it to people who are entirely entitled to eat cheeseburgers. You can't do it. Without going into too much detail, about the particular problems with meat and milk in terms of the Torah's conception, what's fascinating to me is that the Torah considered meat and milk to be so bad that you couldn't even have a business out of it. We don't want you to cook it. We don't want you to eat it. We even don't want you to deal in it. Even your business can have nothing to do with it. Even if you never touch the stuff or taste the stuff, it's so negative you can't have anything to do with it, even your business dealings, which shows, I think, that the Jewish tradition has a very long arm when it comes to our business and seeks to impose its values on our business, quite aside from our personal or ritual behavior. Let's take another idea. Lifnei Iver, placing a stumbling block before the blind, which means tempting somebody into a transgression. That obviously has to infuse all sorts of aspects of a business life. It means accurate weights and measures so that you're not fooling someone to think they've bought more than they really have for their money. Interesting enough, false weights and measures is called a toeva. It's called an abomination, a rarely used phrase in the Torah. It means total honesty with whatever customers a person interacts with. It means fair treatment of workers. It means giving other people actually a chance to make a living. So if somebody has a hardware store, you can't set up a hardware store selling everything 5% cheaper next door because you're taking away that person's livelihood. Now, there's something illegal, certainly not in Australian law. If there's a spare lot in a shopping area, you can set up your hardware store next door, no problem, but not in Judaism. In Judaism, you have to give the other person the chance to make a decent living. So looking at these foundations of these different hashkafic, agadic, philosophical, theological, and then also halachic legal foundations, I think we can see the outlines of the investments, the sort of things we might invest in, that would be against Jewish values. Casinos, we shouldn't be having shares in casinos. We shouldn't be dealing in illegal substances. That's lifnei iver. That's tempting people into doing something which they ought not to be doing. Or dangerous substances, something that can harm them. We shouldn't have shares in tobacco or drugs or guns that could harm somebody. Prostitution. We shouldn't be investing in brothels, something which is possible to do legally in Australia. If a business doesn't conduct itself ethically, we shouldn't be investing in such a business in concert with Jewish values. One that exploits its workers. Any business that flouts the law of the land, because the principle of dinner, the idea that the law of the land in all civil matters is the law. And the corollary, if those are areas we shouldn't invest in on the basis of these Jewish principles, the corollary is that there are areas where we definitely should be, helping a new business get started. Because the Rambam and others tell us, Maimonides and others tell us, that the highest and best form of charity is not to give somebody money, but to set them up in a business so they can earn their own wage. We might want to invest in a business which makes a product that improves the world, renewable energy or sustainable products, solar panels, for example. We should look at for businesses where fair treatment of workers is a priority, and a business where there is a strong reputation for honesty and fair dealing, and one that gives a chance also for other businesses to prosper. So there are, I think, clear ways in which these ancient and overarching principles and legal notions do translate quite directly into guidance for us on how we can invest our money in the businesses which are around today. And that, I think, is my 10 to 15 minutes. So I shall pause there.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Elton. That was really, really fascinating. I'm sure people will have lots of questions following that. I'd like to pass it on to Blair to move on to the ethical investing part of the program.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate it, and lovely to be here with all of you. Hey, thanks for making time to, I know most nights after 5, 6 o'clock, people are happy to settle in at home, have a nice dinner, and leave the world behind. So all of us appreciate your taking time to, ask some questions, find out some information about what you can do on climate change. I've spent a 30-year career looking at all kinds of ways to have an impact on climate change, from activism to working with government agencies to working with business. And my recent kind of maybe post 10 years at 350.org is really focused on my own experience of having run the divestment campaign here in Australia with 350 and watching how quickly the impact of moving money can have on being a positive influence on climate change. So that's why I've spent my last 2 or 3 years really focused on what does that look like? Who are the leaders? Where can we find information to help this move of money happen faster in order to support climate solutions? And tonight, I'm just going to talk you through kind of an introduction of maybe some of that thinking, and before Trevor and Justin talk about the specifics of what you can do and how you do it in Australia. So my talk is a little bit around all the various emerging climate change opportunities, because I think at this point, it's really time to get kind of excited about what's possible, and excited in the sense of 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it was really looking bleak in the sense of how quickly things were moving and whether any of us could have an impact in terms of what we do with our, we might divest, we might do some various things. Now we can actually pick solutions and support them. And it's a pretty exciting time internationally. So we've just finished the big UN global climate talks, and I'm going to touch on some of the things that came out of that are relevant to our thinking in terms of where we can put our money and make a difference. But I just wanted to flash up 3 quotes that might give you an idea of the size and scale of the opportunity, investment-wise, of climate change, which I honestly believe, and many, many other experts around the world have said, this is without a doubt the biggest economic opportunity and investment opportunity that we've seen in our lifetime. The transformation of the global energy sector and systems and so many related things into low carbon or no carbon is transformational. It'll be a challenge, but it offers us a really huge opportunity to help support that effort and also to benefit from it, both in the climate impact sense, but also in our own financial potential ways that we can, invest in and see a reward from doing so. So many of you may have heard of Mark Carney. He's a former banker for the Bank of England, also Canada, head of the Canadian banks, and he's gone on to become a UN financial advisor. Recently, he said the world needs $100 trillion over the next 30 years to build the global climate economy. And at COP, we saw a commitment to $130 trillion by private sector partners into the global climate solutions focused. So where will that money go? Where will it be? How will people put it into the kind of solutions that we need? That's what Climate and Capital Media tracks. And we're looking at a huge array of investment opportunities and innovation that I'll share a few ideas with you about. BlackRock's Larry Fink said the next $1,000 billion startups will all be in climate tech. It just gives you the sense of the size and scale of how fast things are moving in this sector. And I really feel like, honestly, that Australia, because of our government inaction, really lags behind in the understanding of how fast it's moving and really where the opportunities are. And that for most of us who are looking for ways to have a positive impact, this is one way we can do it. But it's pretty exciting to think about which technologies, which innovations, who the leaders are. And by, kind of focusing on it and looking for opportunities, you'll find how quickly things are moving in Europe, the US, and even in Asia. And Australia is really, in some ways, held back from that because our own federal government has been really lacking in stepping up and being a leader and being at the table. So, that's frustrating for many of us, and we feel like there's not much we can do about it. But one thing we can do is find our own opportunities, and I'll touch on a few of those shortly. A lovely friend of mine, Sean Kidney, runs something called the Climate Bonds Initiative, which has had huge global impact in finding institutional large-scale investment opportunities and distinguishing sort of the run-of-the-mill business as usual to what's a positive environmental or climate impact. And at the COP, just in the last couple of weeks, he said there's money pouring out of our ears looking for green. So I just mentioned that because I think it's not just what the opportunities are, but how much money is moving and how quickly. So what do we know about what happened at the COP? You know, it's complicated, and it wasn't like the Paris Agreement where there was one decision that had to be taken. And when they achieved the agreement, you know, champagne and clapping all around. This is quite a different COP with lots of details about financial mechanisms, how countries and the private sector would work together on climate change. So with in mind that we're thinking about the investment opportunities, I've just picked a few things that kind of show the size and scale and areas of interest. So I mentioned the Mark Carney 130 trillion net zero initiative commitment. So that was a commitment made by a whole huge range of countries and companies who are going to work together to look for really ramping up climate solution investment. Something else very much like that is the First Movers Coalition, which was 35 global companies. I just listed a few here, but our own Fortescue Metals from Australia, Boeing, Salesforce, Apple, Amazon. So it wasn't just energy and climate related companies, but mainstream companies that are interested in how can we accelerate climate tech and the kind of systems we need to address climate change. And so while there are 35 to start, my guess is hundreds and hundreds will come on board in the next 6 or 8 months to be part of this, because it's a great opportunity to share information about where the opportunities are and how to support each other in bringing about those kind of climate opportunities. The other thing to mention is the US-China Pact. So two of my founders at Climate and Capital are longtime 20-year Asian media experts who work for Newsweek and other outfits. Their understanding of that agreement was that it was absolutely critical and very unexpected. It was a surprise announcement between the US and China, who really have had a kind of controversial relationship over the last 6 months, since 6 or 8 months. And this decision to choose climate as a way to work together was really interesting and sends a really strong global signal about the importance of it as an issue and the need for speed. So that idea that cooperation on climate between two countries that currently are really at each other on a whole range of trade and other issues is significant, because it sends a signal that they're putting that aside in this case to look for the opportunities, and that's both economic as well as environmental and climate related. The other two interesting things. One is the US and the EU announced on the side an agreement for a green trade zone on steel and aluminum. I mention it only because we're a big producer of steel and aluminum in Australia. We don't have a global accepted high-end level climate commitment. Ergo, we may very well be looking at something called carbon border tariffs and taxes that leave us out of agreements between countries that are raising the agenda on climate change. So that's a political challenge for us, but also a challenge for some of our businesses that want to be very much in the kind of solution side. So I just mentioned it because these green trade zones are kind of seen as a new way for the leading actors to work together to support their own economic interests. And as I understand it, the World Trade Organization has decided that they will not accept legal challenges to that. They will accept that because of climate change, we need to move quickly, and those countries that are really leading have the right to choose to partner in trade with those that are already taking action. So that puts Australia in a challenging place, and it's something to notice, because it will make investment by overseas investors into Australia quite difficult as time goes on, unless we raise that ambition that other countries are doing. And I just mentioned the two other things was a 190 country phase out of agreement to phase out coal faster and to turn their backs on new coal power stations, as well as a global agreement to reduce methane emissions, which are a real climate challenge for the world. So money is moving, it's moving quite fast, and it's the size and scale of that move. I don't need to run through all of that with you, but I just thought I'd throw a few statistics about how quickly it was really over the last 15 years, quite a slow, kind of steady increase into ESG funding, sustainability funding, climate funds. Now that amount of change is happening very, very quickly. And post this recent UN climate talks, it's likely to happen a lot faster. So in terms of, if you're interested in investing in funds, it's really worth watching some of the climate and environmental funds, both here and overseas, just to see how quickly they begin to expand the size of those investors and investment and what they choose to invest in, if you're interested in following kind of where the trends are going. So I've just thrown up a few areas where investment is really going more quickly, where if you're interested in investing, these are kind of the areas where I think most of the interesting and level investment are going. Renewables and distributed energy is not new, but there are interesting new systems and ways to do it, including battery storage and home power stations that are happening all over the world. And there are some great companies in Australia, both focused on the renewable and energy and battery side, but also on the kind of how you structure it and set it up to be sharing systems and clever ways to be more efficient. Green hydrogen, you may have heard that Andrew Forrest is leading the global charge on green hydrogen. And by that, having written in a couple of articles about it, he's spending more money than any country and any company in the world. So if you're interested in following green hydrogen, watch what Andrew Forrest does, because he's basically set up an entire new company focused on kind of where and how quickly we can get green hydrogen happening, which is aviation fuel, large-scale freight, and then making of steel and aluminum. So those are the areas that are probably of most interest, and he's already patenting and coming up with some pretty amazing technology breakthroughs. So worth watching what Fortescue Future Industries is doing in the green hydrogen space. But there are some other kind of more, little less easy to track, but just as important are things like using artificial intelligence for efficiency on energy systems, large scale and regional, using them for energy system management. The blue economy is emerging as a whole new area that's sort of oceans related and climate connected efficiency related to how we do fishing, how we do shipping, and various things in that space. Really interesting. There's something called Investable Oceans, if you're interested in that area. Fascinating how much interest and effort they're putting into highlighting some of the kind of cutting edge blue economy startups that are out there. And then, EVs and electrification, we're hearing a lot about that around the world. Australia is really lagging behind, again, because we don't have a lot of a good national strategy for this, but it will come regardless. And we're seeing that spring up because it's cost efficient. It makes good sense in integrated ways that you use energy. And, for most people, it will come a time quite shortly that where major auto manufacturers are not even making petrol using cars anymore. So it's an area to watch. And I just put disruptors on there because I've recently interviewed another Australian, Danny Kennedy, who runs something called New Energy Nexus. And I asked him, Danny, will it be the large scale existing companies that are the biggest kind of, pushers for these kind of solutions that we're looking at? And he said, I'd bank on the disruptors every time. So keeping an eye on the smaller, the more innovative, and the least who can move very quickly. I think that's where, from all the experts I've talked to, are the interesting places if you're interested in kind of tracking investment. So I just thought I'd put up a few places to watch if you're interested in the issue and where to find out information about investment. Bloomberg Green, of course, Bloomberg is huge, but their green reporting is excellent. They cover a lot of great global trends in where the cutting edge technologies are, who the leaders are, where the money is going. Here in Australia, Renew Economy is just, for me, the best source for information about companies and trends, government action or inaction, which states are moving very quickly. It's worth noting that despite the lack of federal leadership on climate, we're seeing every single state in Australia move very, very quickly, setting up technology hubs, setting up ways to look and support investment into climate solutions. They're not ignoring the economic opportunities of climate change. They're jumping in with both feet. So it's worth watching the New South Wales government, Victorian government, Queensland, et cetera. That's really where I think some of the kind of more creative thinking is happening. And then at Climate and Capital Media, my outfit, we're really trying to really track the trends that investors will need to know about and who the leaders are, both in the US here, Europe and the UK, and then Asia as well. And, it's an interesting time to be working on it. It's an exciting time. And there's some great heroes in the space that are really risking a lot, but stepping right up to kind of push through and find solutions. That's it for me. I just wanted to share some of my kind of bigger picture thoughts about where the stuff is. Having worked at 350.org, I just want to say how grateful I've been over the years to Trevor and to Ethinvest, who've been a real supporter in the effort to look at things like divestment. How quickly can we move money? Where are the solutions? How we can encourage people to be part of the investment solution. And Justin more recently and I looked at, could we start up a fund where people, or a direct investment opportunity for people to find projects? I think one of the frustrations for a lot of us is, it's a great idea, I want to do it, but it's hard to find information about what to do and to do it safely in a trusted way. And I've always had, huge respect for Trevor and for Justin and Ethinvest and their work over the years, long-standing experts in ethical investment. So I'll turn over to you, Trevor, and you might talk about others in the space and how to think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Blair, and thank you very, very, very much, everyone, for having us this evening. It's our pleasure to be here. I'd like to start by reassuring you that Justin and I have only got 3 short slides, and we're not pitching for your business. We're extremely busy at the moment, and so we're going to give you resources that we hope will help you to do it yourself, or to discuss these sorts of investments and these opportunities with your existing advisors. I first invested ethically 30 years ago. I quit my job in 1991 and went to work in economic development in Paraguay. It was before compulsory superannuation, and I was given a payout of all my super contributions. And so I had the princely sum of $20,000 to invest. When I came back 7 years later, that had grown to enough to make a deposit on the place that we currently live in. So I was hooked, and started working in the ethical investment space 25 years ago, joining Ethinvest for $20 an hour, 1 day a week. And we've the goal at that time was to build $20 million in funds under management, where we thought we might be able to move the dial a little bit. We've done a little bit better than that, and there are now 33 of us working in this space. A significant number of my clients are Jewish, some religious, others less so, but certainly keen to invest in ways that reflect the Jewish values that Bishop Elton spoke about so powerfully earlier. And so if we go to the next slide, there's just a quick history of ethical investment. I won't run through it in detail, but just to say that if we can go to the next slide, the history of ethical investment goes back to the very first time somebody made an investment. People have always invested according to their values. They've always favoured some sorts of activities and wanted to avoid others. And the screen in front of you highlights some of the key moments in terms of the institutional journey of formalising some of the opportunities in the ethical investment space. So going back to 1758, the Quakers prohibited members from participating in the slave trade, through to a whole range of faith-based organisations as they accumulated capital for investment, putting limits around what they would or would not invest in. The 60s, the Vietnam War became a key catch cry. And in 1971, the first open ethical investment fund, the Pax Global Fund out of the US, was set up to avoid any investments in companies that were related to the war effort. That picked up through the 70s. There was the Rainbow Warrior incident in New Zealand, where the Greenpeace boat was blown up, and there was a boycott movement against France. There was apartheid in South Africa, and a movement to boycott South African investments. And in the 1980s in Australia, a number of ethical investment funds hit the markets. One of the first was put out by the YMCA with the values of that organisation. And coming out of the permaculture movement, a group called August Investments, which has morphed into a company called Australian Ethical Investments, which now manages more than $5 billion of Australian savings and superannuation invested ethically. Throughout this period, this whole period, it was a values-based conversation. It was ethical investment was about reflecting that your investments reflected your ethical concerns, that there were certain things that you wanted to screen out. You did not want to make any profit from activities that you thought were immoral or unethical, and you particularly wanted to focus on positive things. And I think Bishop Elton articulated that very well. In the last few years, the conversation has changed a little bit. Large financial institutions find it very difficult to talk about values or ones that everybody can subscribe to because they're inherently conflicted and contested. And so the way that this is mainstreamed is through a conversation about risk, where financial institutions have seen that there are risks to a company's reputation if they have problems in the environmental sphere, if they're seen to be polluting or treating the environment with disdain, or in the social sphere, if they are treating workers badly or their customers badly or using slave labor, as Bishop Elton said, or in the governance area, if they don't practice good governance and allow poor business practice and sharp practice to dominate. And so that E for environment, S for social, and G for governance risk framework has mainstreamed and become the most significant way in Australia that this conversation is now undertaken. More than 40% of every dollar invested in Australia, or more than 40% of all the dollars invested, have got some sort of ESG, risk management framework, put around them. And it's very popular with superannuation funds. But it's a risk framework. It's not a values-based framework. And that's not good enough for some. So the other big theme that's come up in the last 5 to 10 years, coming out of the philanthropic movement in the US, is to recognize that every investment that you make creates an impact in the world. And so people have started to talk about impact investments. And that is where you intentionally set out to create positive environmental and social outcomes, as well as reasonable financial returns for the risk that you're taking. And those impacts, whether they be social or environmental or both, are measured and reported on. So an investment is only seen as successful if it ticks all the boxes, not only financial, but also in those other realms. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a new theme emerging, and it's really sort of catalysed around COP and the conversations that Blair's just been talking about, where a number of very large fund managers have started to set up themed investment funds. And the theme is transition to a decarbonised world. What are investments that will actually change the trajectory that we're on in terms of current emissions, and that will clean the oceans, and that will deal with some of the most pressing problems around deforestation, overfishing the world's oceans, the loss of topsoil. These transition funds have become very popular. So it's a space that's gained a lot of attraction, a lot of interest, and where there's increasing amounts of material. When I started 25 years ago, there were only a handful of funds around. Now there are a plethora of funds, and part of our job is actually to wade through and work out which ones are really true to label and which ones are greenwash. And Justin's going to speak about that for a few minutes.
Great, thanks, Trevor. So I might just jump to the next slide. And as Trevor mentioned, I'm just going to run through quite quickly just some resources. Now there's more than what's listed here, but these are the sort of the main resources that we tend to point clients to, especially if they want to learn more and gain greater access to the type of investments that are available in the marketplace. Now, the first two I list there are investment circles. Now, I'm conscious that not all the participants today would fall into what we categorize as a wholesale investor or sophisticated investor. And so they're usually investors that have over $2.5 million in investable assets. And there's certain investment circles that have been have been created in the last 5 to 10 years, which are purely focused on transitioning more capital, both in a philanthropic act, but also, as Trevor mentioned, in impact investment, into investments that have a positive social and environmental impact. And so we've listed a couple of those there. Now, for those who perhaps don't fall into the wholesale investor category, there's also some fairly helpful online tools. Now, the Responsible Investment Association, which is the peak body for responsible investment and ethical investment in Australia, which I've been involved with for some time, also runs a certification project, which looks at what's under the bonnet of a lot of these products, and as to does the Ethical Advisors Cooperative through their Greenleaf rating as well. So there's another two resources that we tend to point clients to as an opportunity for them to apply their own ethics in the sense of their values, and especially the responsible returns web tool allows you to select the values that suit you, that you would like to avoid, and the ones that you'd like to gain access to. A little bit like as Rabbi Elton mentioned earlier, a lot of the ethical values align with the categories of the ethical investment. We've also highlighted a few online courses. So the PRI stands for Principles for Responsible Investment. It's a UN-backed initiative, and they run an academy which is pitched at different levels of depth in responsible investment. And they have a 3-hour course that's more pitched for those who want to get a 101 in responsible and ethical investing. But also we came across another individual or another company that run RASC education, and they run another 101 free course as well. Now, if you prefer to do a bit of reading and also be able to dive in a little bit deeper into what some organisations like Choice and CanStar believe is the best way to go about ethical investing, there's some extra resources that we've included, and I believe this is going to be handed out to all of you, so you can sort of click on those links. It's a bit hard to click on them right now, but you'll be able to click on them in your own time. So that was it. I'm going to hand back to Trevor.
Thanks, Justin. Just to conclude, we'd like to encourage you to look at those resources. There's some good material out there, and just to cover off on a couple of things. Firstly, we're very happy to answer any questions that you have, and if we happen to mention certain investments, that's not recommendations. We need to do a full needs analysis before we give you financial advice, and even though we're qualified financial advisors, this evening's session will be general advice only. And second, just to finish here with this slide, most people assume that their investments or their superannuation funds are invested ethically. That's not necessarily the case. It's worthwhile doing a bit of digging. The biggest myth in our business is that ethical investments underperform. The question that most people ask me first up in the meeting is, how much will I sacrifice by investing ethically? And the well-hidden secret is the fact that ethical investments have performed very strongly over long periods of time and slightly outperformed unscreened investments. We certainly don't promise that you'll outperform, but we certainly don't think you have to sacrifice returns to invest in companies that do the right thing, that treat people well, that treat the planet well, and are focused on industries of the future rather than industries of the past. So I think we should turn it over to questions now, because time is of the essence. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. Those are such fascinating presentations, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions for you all. Just to review the protocol for asking questions, that is preferable, if you can, use the hand icon so that I can call on you, and then you'll be highlighted and you can ask the question yourself. If you really don't want to do that, you can put it in the chat, but please post it to everyone rather than to just the host, because I'm not the host and I won't be able to see it. So, so those are the options. Put your hand up to ask a question, or type your question in the chat to everyone, and I will call on you. Let me see if there's anything else I need to tell you. That's it. Okay, so do we have any hands up yet? Okay, we have a question for Rabbi Elton. Lyndall, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the fantastic presentations from all of you. I was wondering, Rabbi Elton, you talked about fairness in business. Is there anything in Jewish teachings about money and investments and equity, whether there's anything about making sure everyone has enough and no one has too much?
Thank you for the question. There's certainly a great deal of emphasis on making sure that everyone has enough. So every Jewish community has always set up some sort of social security branch and some sort of central fund to make sure that everyone is looked after to some extent, has the basics. There's a very famous expression of that on the Mishnah says that on Seder night, every person has to have 4 cups of wine, even those provided for by the public purse, even those who are on some sort of welfare payment provided by the community has to provide them with 4 cups of wine. So it not only has to be proportionate, not only has to be a certain minimum level, but also has to be proportionate to the needs. There's no point giving them enough for bread and water when on Seder night they're going to need 4 cups of wine. In terms of earning too much, I think that's never been frowned upon as long as there's a great deal of charitable giving that comes with it. So the great Jewish figures of business are celebrated really because of what they gave away, not because of what they earned. And the Sassoons, the Rothschilds, Moses Montefiore, these are all famous for what they gave back as much as their brilliant business acumen. It was said about one Rothschild in the 19th century, he'd give anybody £1,000, which is a lot of money in the 19th century, if they could make a decent case for it. Or when a boat arrived from Eastern Europe into London, into the port of London, the social sort of welfare people rushed to the Rothschild's office in the city of London and said, look, we've just got 1,000 Jews have just arrived off the boat. We need £10,000 immediately in order to look after them for the first few weeks they're here. And the 2 Rothschilds, they met, talked to each other, and they wrote a check for £15,000. And the person receiving it said, no, you've made a mistake. And he said 10,000. They said, there's no need to have compassion on us. We know what we're giving away. Or my favorite story is Moses Montefiore, who was asked how much he was worth, and he gave a figure. And the interviewer said, no, but by my calculations, you're worth 10 times that. He said, no, you asked me what I was worth. I told you what I gave away in charity over the past year. That's what I'm worth. The rest is just the money I've made. That's a different matter entirely. So the ethos is everyone needs to be supported to a certain level, and those who have should be giving generously from what they have.
Thank you.
Michal Levy.
Thank you. To either Justin or Trevor, I'd like to know about the Ethical Investment Fund. How do you unpack exactly the great, what they're investing in? Because it sort of comes like a package, and it's even sort of, in my case, they're the wholesalers to another fund. So I go through another fund to them, and I'd really like to unpack that a little bit better.
That's right. It's a very good question. And really, the ethical investment's all about knowing what your money's actually doing, not what you think it might be doing. So the first thing to do is to look at the standards that are applied, what ethical screens are applied. And usually there is some statement around that. And then the second thing is to go to one of those 2 websites that Justin mentioned. The Ethical Advisors Co-op actually gives a rating, a green leaf rating out of 5 possible leaves. And that shows how true to label those funds are in delivering the outcomes that you're expecting. A lot of the very large funds score quite poorly because they have highfalutin statements, but their actual portfolios don't reflect those very well. But some score very well, where they've got very clear guidelines and they stick to them. So there are resources out there. And if you're in a fund and you find that it rates poorly, we always encourage people to write to their fund and say, what's going on? We understood that our money was being carefully screened here. And if you write to your super fund, even if they're using other managers, you can ask them how much exposure you have to things that you don't agree with, and it's their obligation to come back to you with a clear answer. And if you don't, the big secret of financial services is to complain. If you lodge a formal complaint, it triggers a whole process where they have to take you seriously. So threaten a complaint, and they will bend over backwards.
I was also wondering about banks. You know, how do we find out if our bank is a big fossil fuel lender?
Yeah, Blair has posted in the chats column a link to Market Forces. Market Forces is an advocacy group that works in the ethical investment space and works closely with us to attend bank AGMs and put pressure on them. And they go through the bank statements and collate as best they can all of the lending of the banks to fossil fuels. And the banks very rarely refute their figures. So we just have to assume they're reasonably close. And so if you want to have a look at your bank, have a look at Market Forces, and they will do a good job of telling you how implicated in fossil fuels the banks are.
Thank you. And thank you for tonight, all of you. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, the next question is from Libby Burke. Is there a minimum amount you'd recommend for investing?
Justin and I have given advice in the past couple of weeks for as little as $2,000 and as much as 15 million. So however much you've got to invest, apply your principles and invest it ethically. There are funds out there that will take relatively small amounts. If you have larger amounts to invest, there are a range of opportunities, and push your advisor to get good advice around this. There's no minimum. I think people would, I always say to people who are motivated by faith-based concerns that you really want all of your financial statements to be a testimony to the faith that you profess.
Anne Crooks, question for Trevor. Can you speak to impact investment bonds as opposed to equity in companies?
Sure. There's been a new category of investment in recent years called social impact bonds. It's where governments will work with a charity to identify a problem that needs fixing. And the government will say to the charity, if you run a pilot program that makes a material difference to that problem, we will pay you a success fee. And then the charity goes out and raises private money to fund that pilot program. And if the program is successful, then the success fee gets paid to the charity, and the charity shares some of that with the investors. So it's a way of mobilising private capital to try and address some social issues. The first one was at Peterborough Prison in the UK, where there was a problem of recidivism. And so a charity was set up, a charity raised money from the public to run a program to address recidivism. And if it was successful, people were paid a decent return. That has come to Australia. Mike Baird was a big champion when he was the Treasurer of New South Wales of this, and New South Wales committed to running 2 of these a year. There's been a whole range of problems addressed in Australia, some successfully, some less successfully. There's a very good program running in South Australia dealing with homelessness. There's been some fantastic programs providing support to children, young adults between the ages of 18 and 21 receiving out of home or living out of home. At the moment, often people, when they turn 18, fail to receive any further benefits. So if they're living with a foster family or if they're living in care, suddenly they're on their own. And the incidence of homelessness and brushes with the law is horrific in the first year after people turn 18. And so these programs have provided support through to age 21 with life skills wrapped around that, and they've been very successful. The governments save an awful lot of money by dealing with these issues, and so they're prepared to pay some of that back as an incentive. So it's an interesting social experiment. The pros are that you get private money working to solve issues that might not be otherwise funded. People who are critical say that this is the government's business. They should just be funding it anyway, and they shouldn't be going to all the trouble of setting up the bonds. The National Australia Bank and Westpac raised a social impact bond. They raised $7 million. It cost them more than $2 million to raise it. So there are some efficiencies that need to be gained in that space.
Great, thank you. Annie, would you like to, you have a long-ish question. Do you want to ask it yourself? She's getting unmuted. Okay, I can ask it for you. The super funds currently reliant on fossil fuels. Should we expect a drop in performance as they transition? Conversely, if they don't transition, should we be aware they leave our super at risk? And at what point in the future could this become a critical risk?
Justin loves
I'm
questions.
happy. Yeah, happy to say a couple things. One is the stranded asset risk becomes kind of greater as global action starts to happen, and the market signals internationally that coal, oil, and gas are done as an investment become stronger and stronger day after day. An interesting thing to look at that I just saw today is the cost of raising capital for oil and gas is, I think, 13 to 15%. Internationally. For renewable energy, it's 3 to 4%. So I'm just giving you an example of how hard it is becoming to continue to operate as a coal, oil, and gas business versus transitioning into other things where the capital is cheaper. It's becoming more accessible. There's more investor backing for these kinds of things. At this point, most superannuation funds are aware of the risk. It's really a question for you about both from an ethical point of view, certainly, within the Jewish mindset of what you think is the right thing to do, about when you make a kind of switch that way, but also economically, whether you think I want to wait to the last minute or I don't want to risk that, and I want to move to a super fund that's better managing my funds. Future Super is an example of a super fund that is doing no fossil fuel investment. There are others as well. So I posted in the super kind of list there that Market Forces has a comparative. But it is a real risk if you leave your super in, say, you've been somewhere forever and it's somebody, you've been with and you don't want to make the move. It's worth investigating how aware they are of this stranded asset risk, but also the financial risk generally of climate change. But maybe more importantly, how open they are to exploring the opportunities in the climate solution side, which are becoming more and more, I think, interesting, quick to bring returns, and if you choose well, better options. And speaking personally, I've just started to explore investing my own investments in a few companies, and it's remarkable to see when you pay attention and you pick what you think is, you watch closely, you listen to what they say, you look at where their interests are and how they're focusing on the global market in the climate solution space. It's not that hard to find some winners that really are looking at where it's going and where it's moving very quickly. So find a super fund that's doing the same, that matches your interest. And if they're not doing it, as Trevor said, ask questions, tell them you're unhappy, and threaten to move if they don't give you the answers you're looking for, because there are super funds that will give you what you're looking for, whether it's a subset fund that they're doing, a sustainability fund or a climate fund, or whether it's their whole package of investment. So it's our right as investors to ask those questions and to ask about the risk factor. One thing we haven't talked at all about in this kind of discussion is climate physical risk. So the other really big financial challenge for all of us worldwide is the impacts of climate, extreme weather, heat, et cetera, that are now starting to impact all over the world in different ways. And people are beginning to model what that looks like. So another gauge for whether a super fund or an investment fund or a business is savvy enough to be protecting your investment is how far they've gone down the climate risk analysis kind of side. Have they really looked at what their infrastructure risk is, their customer risk, their supply chain risk? These are all areas now through something called the TCFD, which is like a way to kind of judge what your risk is like. So, looking at whether companies are doing these things, whether they're judging their own risk, is a good indicator of whether they're on top of that kind of whole of climate risk. So I encourage you to ask tough questions. And as investors, whether it's your super fund, your bank, or your private investment, absolutely have the right to ask really hard questions about what they're doing with the money, how really aware they are of how quickly things are moving financially, and how quickly they're moving from a risk point of view.
Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute likens the fossil fuel companies to the ice cream vendor on the beach who suffers a cut to her power line. And so the ice cream is starting to melt. So suddenly you don't care about what price you charge. You just got to get the ice cream sold before it melts. And the coal companies are like that too. They've just got to get the coal out of the ground and sell it while they still can. But at some point, you end up with a non-investment, and you want to be out of those markets well before that happens.
I was just going to add that the super funds themselves have a fiduciary duty to manage your retirement savings and to factor a number of risks in their decision making. Now, a lot of the super funds, I guess their interpretation of that fiduciary risk hasn't gone as far as it needs to. And as Trevor was mentioning earlier, if you utilize one of the tools and you find out that your super fund does have considerable exposure to fossil fuels, the best way to make them aware of your concerns is really to engage with them. Some of them will talk about their own engagement with fossil fuel companies, and that is seen as a form of influence as well. So look, it's fair to say that it depends on your own preferences. If you believe that engagement with fossil fuel companies through your super fund is a preference for yourself, as to how effective that is can be questionable, but it is an important part of the process. But you know, if you're looking for a zero tolerance approach, then those tools will help you as well.
Great, thanks everyone. We have one more question. Are the large mining corporations like BHP starting to transfer to green energy?
Yeah, a little bit. You know, they have sold out a lot of coal, but one of the challenges ethically for all of us that are interested in this, just selling out and letting someone buy it down the what I call the bottom feeder track of fossil fuels, in my ethical opinion, is just continuing another 20 or 30 years of letting fossil fuels continue. What we need to see in terms of corporate leadership is retiring existing coal, oil, and gas, and finding financial mechanisms to do that, which there's a real growth in what I call blended finance, ways to piece together charity, community, foundations, plus private sector money to retire old coal and oil and gas and look toward transitioning that immediately into the clean alternatives that the communities need. As an investor, finding those companies that are really looking at ways to do that, and there are some. I'm just doing a story on 5 examples of what I call sterilization, the removing the fossil fuels instead of continuing to just hand them down to the next company. Sure, you can sell them and you can make a little bit of money, you know, reduce your loss, and move on and say, hey, I'm good, I don't have coal in my portfolio anymore. But have you really done any good if you made all the money from it and then you flee the market, dumping, if you will, the fossil fuel problem on often the community, often the next company or the one after that will go bankrupt, leaving the community and the government and our taxpayer money to buy out what's left of the mess. And when I say mess, I mean a massive disaster of a cleanup that has to happen that we'll all pay for. So is that corporate leadership? I would say no. Let's look to the companies that are finding some really creative ways to sterilize existing fossil fuels, find new economic opportunities in that transition. And they're out there, not so much in Australia yet, but the trend is happening globally. So I think we'll start to see some of the leaders step up and say, I'm going to try to find a way to make that economically viable. It may not be something you make a lot of money in, but it may mean you, instead of just selling on, you stay level while helping that transition to happen because you made that money over the last 100 years in fossil fuels that have been very destructive to the communities and environments that they're in.
Great
I fully
point.
agree with what Blair just said. It's it's true that Rio Tinto and BHP and now AGL, large companies with large fossil fuel footprints, are divesting themselves of those assets. And it just shows how strong this theme is, that those companies want those assets off their balance sheets as quickly as they can.
Great, thank you. Eve.
Hi, thank you everyone for organising this and for all the speakers. This has been such a wonderful event. So my question, I guess whoever wants to answer, maybe Blair, you might be best, but there were at least 70 people on this call, and I assume everyone's here because they're interested in this. And something I've encountered with not just ethical investing, but also generally trying to make decisions about being more climate conscious requires you to sit down and do a lot of research and get your head around concepts that maybe are difficult to understand. And I think that puts a lot of people off. So how do we, for the people who aren't on this call, whether that's our friends, family members, other community members, community organizations, what are the things that we can do, having attended this, to try and convince, not necessarily the unconvinced, but the neutrals or people who are like, yeah, I know I really should do this, but I actually don't have the time or capacity to read through all those amazing resources that you've sent through or attend a 90-minute webinar. Like, what can we do to try and push them over the edge to get interested and involved in these conversations?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think maybe start with one thing, whether it's your bank or your super fund, and just say, make some choices. Do you feel comfortable? Are you doing things that you feel are right with your money, either in your bank or your super fund? And I find with a lot of people, once they start down the path of asking questions, it leads them to the next question, the next question. It is an educational kind of process, but it doesn't have to be that hard. And things like the market forces, kind of online tools help people do that pretty simply. The other thing that, Trevor and Justin have talked about is talking to your financial advisors to say, I'd rather do good things with this. What are my options? It's not so hard. You're really choosing between what you maybe already have to maybe a slight change or a switch over to some things. It's not radical, but your advisor, if you already have one, can help you do that. Or if you find the answers aren't what you're looking for, then you make a choice to move over to something, an outfit that really has that as their kind of core business. So that sort of is a way to kick off. For some people where financial and investment isn't where their interest lies, joining a local community group on climate change can be just as effective, because you can find out what you can do at your own home, in your own community, how you can support activities and things that are going on. And for some people, that's much more kind of what they're interested in and understand and feel a connection with. So all those things are relevant. Things like putting solar panels on your own home, or working at a community garden or a compost, kind of community setup. These are all super valid things. None of them are better or worse than the other. Tonight, we're just talking about investment because we thought it's an area that a lot of people don't know enough about. And with COP happening, it's really front and center of a lot of people's minds about it's moving fast. I don't really know what's going on. How can I find out more about it? I think some of the tools that Justin put up are really great. So even just a little dip into some of those can tell you a little bit about how to start down the path.
Eve, it's a great question. It sounds like you're a motivated sort of person. So I suggest that you read that stuff and you make a decision, and you move your banking, or you do your own super, and then you find out that it takes really 3 to 5 minutes to change your super fund, or it's not a hard process. And then you just tell people what you've done. You don't have to convince them. You just say, "Hey, I switched my super to an ethical fund. Looks really good. It took 3 minutes. Here's the link."
Great. Jenny.
Thanks very much. Yes, thank you for what a fabulous evening it's been. So I'm someone who's never had a financial advisor, and mainly because I've never known what criteria to use to trust anyone, but also because I don't have much money. But I am thinking of downsizing and wanting to contribute to habitat restoration eventually. So I'm wondering, like, are there any guidelines for how to find a reputable advisor?
It's an important question because everybody's got a story about a disreputable advisor. At parties, I never say I'm a financial planner. I tell people I work in ethical investment. So we understand the concerns. What I would suggest is that you go to the Ethical Advisors Co-op or the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia. Both of those are the websites that Justin put up. And they have a list of financial advisors who are accredited or certified as being expert in the area of this renewable or sustainable investment, but also fully qualified financial advisors, appropriately licensed, and therefore with all of the qualifications and insurances and safeguards that you'd expect. So that's one way, or you ask your friends who they deal with, and if they know somebody good, you go and see them.
Sharon.
Hi, I was just wondering a little bit about banking. I think I looked at the market forces thing on the banking, the different banks, and like, it just looked like all of the main banks that I would ever think about were not okay. And like, I think maybe people feel weird about putting their mortgage into funny little banks. So I'm just interested on what your take on that is. Okay.
Bank Australia, it's not a funny little bank.
Okay.
If you have a banking license in Australia, you're regulated by APRA and you have to meet prudential requirements. So any bank has jumped through those hoops and is carefully regulated. So we encourage people to look at some of those smaller banks. They're still very large institutions. They're small by comparison to the behemoths, but they're not small institutions. And most of them provide a suite of banking services that meets the average person's needs in terms of credit cards and personal loans and home loans and those sorts of things. Teachers Mutual Bank and Bank Australia are the two that stand out in terms of ethical screening and consistency. But any of the credit unions and building societies and those that have turned into mutual banks have been set up for the benefit of their members, not for shareholders. And so they pass muster as well. So you don't have to stick with the big four. If you have to stick with the big four for convenience, then you read market forces and you ask them what they're doing and you try and put a little bit of pressure on. You show that you're concerned about these things and you use your voice to press for change. The banks are probably a little bit ahead of the curve on a lot of the sustainability stuff because they see the risks, the stranded asset risks that Blair was talking about. So even though they've got legacy investments and they're not moving quite as fast as we want, they've moved quite a bit in the last 10 years and they know it's a big issue. So the more that customers say, this is important to me and I would change my banking if you don't continue this move, the quicker the change will come.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question from Annie.
I found the mute button. I'm using two windows, sorry. The question is, you say, ask them the questions or, tell them that you want a change, but who am I addressing that to? I've got really no relationship with a bank manager anymore. Who do I send these messages to?
Head of sustainability.
You also find the market forces tool tends to have a contact button, which allows you to send an email directly to the relevant contact within the organisation. Having worked at Bendigo Bank for almost a decade, I can tell you from a lot of the engagement that was covered during my time from customers is that those emails do get read and they do raise a lot of internal concerns. I think it started at Bendigo Bank with a couple of emails, and before too long, those couple of emails turned into 50 emails, and it didn't take too long for the organisation to take these concerns seriously. I think once we hit 10 emails of a similar flavour, that it actually started to create a bit of a ripple effect internally. So even at a large, fairly, considerably large organisation like Bendigo Bank, 10 emails made a difference. So just to give you a bit of insider knowledge on what happens on the inside.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we are at time for our Q&A. I just want to wrap up for a few minutes before we say goodnight. This has been just such a fascinating conversation. There's clearly tremendous interest in this from our community. There were a lot more people who wanted to attend and weren't able to make it this evening and have asked us to share the recording with them. And that's something we will definitely do, as well as share your PowerPoint. Thank you for allowing us to do that. And I think that it really speaks to the need for us as a Jewish community to continue this conversation. And as Eve Altman indicated, this is something that we should really think about. How can we, who care about these issues, come together and bring our energy around this to the larger Jewish community? And so I think that's definitely something that we as a Jewish Sustainability Initiative and our partners will continue to pursue. And I want to invite you all to join us. So you've seen posted a few times a QR code that's been on the screen. You can see it. You can see it there in the gallery view as well. If you scan that, it will lead you to a really super quick survey, just a few questions. It gives us an idea of what you, as members of the Jewish community, are interested in, what kinds of environmental issues you're interested in learning more about, so that we can cater these informative events and workshops and in-person workshops that we will be having in the new year in a way that speaks to your passions and interests. So, and if anybody is interested in joining our volunteer group, we are very welcoming to you all, and you can indicate that on the survey as well. So I want to thank very much the panelists for this evening, giving of your time and your brilliance. It was just such a fascinating conversation. Rabbi Elton, all of you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. I also want to thank Oliver Davies, who's hiding behind that screen with the QR code. And he's donated his time to help with all of the AV this evening. Thank you so much for making everything go so smoothly. We also want to thank the Willara Council for their community environmental grant that they awarded us, so that we can provide these programs to you all. I want to make a little plug for our next event, which we're going to be doing with the Emmanuel Synagogue over Hanukkah, called Lighten, get it lightened, lighten your carbon footprint, which is focused on switching to renewable energy in our homes and businesses, from small to big ways. So look out for that. We'll share more information with you all about that upcoming event on December 1st. So thank you all so much, and look forward to continuing this discussion with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
That's my daughter singing. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks for having us. Hi, Joe. Hi, Linda.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Really amazing to have you.
It's good to be here. Thank you. Well done. Ciao.
I'll follow up with you guys. Right, talk soon. Bye-bye.